This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
The United States to stay in the WHO as President Joe Biden reverses several Trump policies. Biden and Africa, what's the continent's prospects and priorities? And dozens of migrants rescued off the Libyan coast. Hello and welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. Also ahead this hour. The African Development Bank to provide debt relief of more than $400 million in debt arrears to Sudan. And in sport, hosts Cameroon held by Mali as Zimbabwe is knocked out of the African Nations Championship. We start the hour in the United States, where Joe Biden has begun implementing his agenda as the 46th president of the nation. Nathan King reports from Washington.
A busy first day for the Biden administration. Just 3 hours after being sworn in as the 46th president of the United States, he literally trotted up the driveway here of Pennsylvania Avenue into the White House. He's been there many times before, but crossed that threshold as president for the first time. Straight to the Oval Office, stacks of binders on his desk. He's signing executive orders and other legislation that he hopes he can introduce into Congress. You know, the one thing we did discover straight away is that Donald Trump defied, of course, many traditions, including not turning up the inauguration, but he left a letter in the Resolute desk, as many presidents before him have, and apparently, well, it was pretty un-Trumpian, according to the new president.
The president wrote a very generous letter. It's because it was private. I will not talk about it until I talk to him, but it was generous.
Now, he may have said it was generous, gracious, but Joe Biden is wasting no time in rolling back a lot of Donald Trump's initiatives, especially, for example, the Muslim travel ban that caused so much chaos at the beginning of the Trump administration. New movements on immigration to protect children who arrive without papers, who are now adults in this country, the so-called dreamers. There's going to be an immigration bill. Obviously, rejoining the Paris Climate Accord was a highlight, congratulated by Emmanuel Macron, the French president, and applauded by most of the rest of the world alike. There is a lot of work to do on others. They are going to hit the ground running. They are getting some confirmations of their top people through from the Senate. Avril Haines, she has been confirmed as the first female head of Director of National Intelligence. They think Janet Yellen, the first female Treasury Secretary, will be confirmed next week. We're still waiting on timing for Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State. They really want their national security team and foreign policy team in place. One thing we did have, which was an actual press conference with civility. Jen Psaki, the new press secretary, held a briefing in which she was asked many questions. There was a polite back and forth. She promised transparency and truth, but was pushed on whether President Joe Biden thought Donald Trump was responsible for the insurrection of January 6th. Well, there was a diplomatic, but you kind of understood where she was going with her answer.
He ran against Donald Trump because he did not think he was fit to serve in office long before the events of January 6th. He is here today because he decided to run against him, but we're focusing on moving forward. We're focusing on addressing the issues facing the American public, and as you know, that means we're focused on our COVID package.
And that's the problem for the Biden administration. Do they live in the shadow of Trump with a Senate trial still pending on the second impeachment of Donald Trump, or do they move forward on their agenda as fast as they can? The first 100 days is very important for any presidency. They want to try and reach across the aisle to Republicans. Will a Senate trial of Donald Trump complicate that? Of course it will. But remember, 2 senators got sworn in today as well from Georgia, both Democratic, a 50-50 tie in the Senate. Kamala Harris will be the tie break as president of the Senate as well. They have a slim majority in the House and the White House. This is a real chance for them to act, but they're going to need some support from Republicans as they go forward. It's going to be an interesting time in Washington. Can the healing begin and bipartisanship really begin again? Well, the cynic in me says no, but let's give them a chance. Nathan King, CGTN, near the White House in Washington.
Well, it is only day one of the Biden presidency, but the U.S. has already stopped the process of its withdrawal from the WHO. At a time, the World Health Body is, of course, holding an executive board meeting to discuss developments on the pandemic. Top of that is, of course, top U.S. infectious disease expert Anthony Fauci has addressed the meeting as head of the U.S. delegation, discussing America's resumption of its role in global public health and humanitarian responses to the pandemic. President Joe Biden moved to reverse the U.S.'s withdrawal from the WHO, initiated last year by his predecessor, Donald Trump. This comes as the U.S.'s overall tally of coronavirus infections surpasses 24 million. Well, let's bring you more on this now. We're joined by our correspondent, Mia Albert, who is, of course, keeping an eye on the WHO Executive Board meeting, live with us from Budapest. Mia, as we know, the U.S. has now decided to stay in the World Health Organization family. Just give us a sense of what this means, especially at this stage of the pandemic.
Well, let me use the words from the WHO Director General, Dr. Tedros. He said, following the news, that this is a good day for the WHO and that this is a good day for global health. And we have two parties which are very interested in the US rejoining, which is the WHO, of course, and the US itself. As you just said, the country is facing a number of infections that is quite high, and the country has not been able to lower this number, and it's also facing some challenges in vaccination. And so with the US joining or rejoining or not withdrawing from the WHO anymore, it means that it will have more support, and it will also join the COVAX, the global effort to develop the vaccine, which is going to be very important for Americans to be able to access this jab. But for the WHO, mainly the main importance of this address from today is that they will be receiving funding from the US. And why is this important? Because the US is the largest single contributor to the WHO. In 2019, it funded over $400 million, and that represents almost 20% of the total budget of the WHO. And so, of course, a very good day for the WHO, and especially for lower income countries which are more dependent on these kinds of funding. And so we'll be able to probably get more access to help during this stage of the pandemic.
And of course, Mia, the United States is being represented by Dr. Anthony Fauci, a very prominent voice in America's fight against the coronavirus pandemic. But now here he is on the world stage. Tell us more about his address to the WHO board.
Well, he said that it was his honor to announce that the WHO, the US, will remain in the WHO. And as you can imagine, Dr. Fauci has been next to Trump in the last year or so, since the beginning of the pandemic. He said that actually today marks a full year that the US registered its first case of COVID. And Dr. Fauci was heavily criticized by the Trump administration. So I imagine that for him, personally, this is also a great day in which he will have an administration that is standing by him, and he can resume his collaboration with the WHO and his friends. Dr. Tedros called him a brother. So as you can see, a lot of happiness and cooperation in their speeches today. He announced, like I said, the resuming of funding, which is a very big important step for the WHO and the US. He also announced the US joining the COVAX initiative, so that will be very important for Americans to have equitable access to the vaccine, but also to lower income countries to have more funding and more access to the vaccine as well. And he also announced that the US will stop withdrawing members, so staffing is also a very important part of this. So a great day for both the US and the WHO.
Certainly a very good start to this WHO meeting, but with 5 more days to go, what more can we expect out of these talks?
While the WHO will continue to look within and review the way it has worked throughout the pandemic, one of the key words that we've been listening this week is reform. Of course, this pandemic just caught everyone off guard, and obviously that just shows that there was a gap in the WHO and in countries individually, but especially in this World Health Organization that was unprepared to deal with the pandemic. And so we've been hearing a lot about reforming parts of the organization that deal with monitoring and detecting diseases and future pandemics. There's a very important focus on building international cooperation initiatives so that if this happens again, or when this happens again, there will be a global response instead of a scattered response, kind of like we saw during the beginning of the pandemic. So the WHO reform is the main topic in the agenda right now. We might also expect some more comments coming from the team in China who is investigating the sources of the pandemic. So that's something that we are also monitoring for any updates.
Mia Albert, thank you so much for that update, joining us there live from Budapest. Now, China, well, let's start in Shanghai. The city has just reported 3 new local transmissions today. Authorities on Wednesday reported 144 new confirmed cases on the Chinese mainland. 126 of these are local cases, with the greatest number of 68 infections in Heilongjiang province. 33 are in Jilin, 20 in Hebei, 2 in Beijing, 2 in Shaanxi, and 1 in Shandong. 18 imported cases have also been reported, registered in 7 provinces and municipalities. The Spring Festival, or Chinese New Year, falls on February 12th this year. The number of travelers will soon increase across the country. With an eye on rural areas, the National Health Commission has announced that people need to show negative nucleic acid test results within 7 days before returning to their hometowns. Once there, health monitors will check on them for 14 days. And while in their hometowns, they may not attend gatherings and must take a nucleic acid test every 7 days. Another news, the International Organization for Migration says 48 migrants have been rescued off the coast of Libya. Among them are 11 children and a woman. The organization said in a tweet on Wednesday that staff were at the Tripoli port to provide emergency assistance. IOM has stressed that Libya is not a safe port for disembarkation. Even so, thousands continue to attempt to cross the Mediterranean Sea each year, trying to reach Europe. Time now for a short break. Here's what's still ahead on the program. An unusual year begins for children across Africa as learning is thrown into disarray. And in Kenya's Rift Valley, local experts educate residents on staying safe from snakes. Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories. Let's have a look. We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
I've been Djibouti, Tunis, Cairo,
Juba,
Ethiopia,
Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice. How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice. We start in Zimbabwe now, where a rise in the number of COVID-19 cases in the country has seen the government impose restrictions on traditional burial rites. The new rules require that trained professionals bury the dead. Body viewing is not allowed and relatives are to be kept at a distance. The government says the measures are necessary to combat the spread of the virus, but locals feel they're too drastic and unjustified.
Somehow funerals have been spreaders of the infections. We have now had a couple of cases where people have visited, have attended the funeral, and then the next thing they are sick and they are dead. And sometimes you can even have several family members. After attending a funeral, they get sick, some they don't make it.
They should allow a few relatives to conduct body viewing during the time the body is being prepared from the mortuary to coffin. That will allow closure for the bereaved family.
It's not proper to just bury our loved ones without bidding them farewell or in a place where we will have limited access to. It doesn't reflect well on our cultural norms.
We had our highest number of COVID-19 burials yesterday. We buried 14 people. This disease is real. Let's observe the regulations.
Meanwhile, many schools in Nigeria have reopened, this despite a request by Parliament for the government to delay the resumption of schools by another 3 months. Nigeria is currently battling a second wave of COVID-19 infections and has seen a spike in the infection rate. CGTN's Deji Badmos reports.
With the surge in COVID-19 infections, many had predicted students' turnout at school will be low. But surprisingly, the reverse has been the case.
Being at home, doing nothing, the more we remain at home, the more we forget some of our things we have learned. So as far as the COVID-19 protocols are adhered to, I can boldly say that I'm not scared.
We still have to carry on with our lives because who knows when it's going to leave, and if it stays for a long period of time, are we going to put our lives on hold for 5 years because of just a virus?
With school shut for most of last year, teachers too are happy to be back in class.
I feel it's the best thing to do. There's no point staying at home. As long as we practice the COVID-19 guidelines, and as you can see that the students are all with their mask, and with mine, they practice proper hand washing there. Even in the whole compound, we have our wash hand, the sink there.
Not all schools in the country have reopened. Some states have moved their school resumption date forward, waiting to see how the COVID-19 situation plays out. But in Lagos, the authorities have asked every school to reopen while putting protective measures in place.
This decision was a very difficult decision, a very measured decision, taken after consultation with health officials, safety officials, parents, schools, and so this decision was taken in the best interest of the majority of the children who are very vulnerable. If they were not here, where would they be?
The decision to reopen schools in Nigeria is a controversial one, but the country's lower house of parliament and Ministry of Education opposed the move.
Federal government has only about 100 out of thousands of schools. The schools are under the jurisdiction of states. And just like the Minister of Education was unanimous in saying that schools should not open, states were unanimous in saying that they should open.
The Lagos state government estimates that about 24,000 students in the state are yet to resume for fear of the pandemic. For now, authorities are committed to ensuring that the students who have resumed are kept out of COVID's way, at least while they're in school. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Well, let's return now to our top story. The winds of change are sweeping through the United States and indeed much of the world as Joe Biden takes his place in the White House. It is only the new president's first day in office, but he has already signed a number of executive orders. So what does his presidency mean for Africa? Well, we're joined by Dr. Idayat Hassan, the director of the Center for Democracy and Development, to help answer that question. Dr. Hassan joins us from Abuja. Now let's get some perspective, Doctor. Of course, President Biden's executive orders relating to the pandemic were certainly expected, but what's your take on some of the other orders already signed, like reversing the discriminatory restrictions on immigration?
think really for us it's a positive. This inauguration of President Biden yesterday represents an end to unilateralism and the beginning of multilateralism. In fact, as it relates to the pandemic, it means that we'll have more vaccines on the continent with the US rejoining the WHO. More money will actually be put in, and Africa.
Oh, we do apologize for that. We seem to have lost Dr. Hassan there in Abuja. But staying with the United States, or rather, let's move to Libya. Delegates in the country have agreed on a referendum for a draft constitution formed in 2017. The delegates representing rival administrations were meeting in Egypt. The constitutional talks aimed to lay the legal groundwork for Libya to hold elections at the end of the year. Here's Adel Al-Mahroui with more.
A day after the United Nations announced an agreement between Libyans over the mechanism to appoint an interim executive authority, there was more good news. Representatives of Libya's eastern-based parliament and western-based High Council of State have agreed on the process to form a new constitution for the country.
There have been arguments about whether the elections should be held on the same legal basis which the ones in 2012 and 2014 were held. Or should there be new regulations? So the differences between the Libyan parliament and the High Council of State are in their views about the legalities and the procedures of the elections. That's why the agreement is very important.
A document from the meeting circulated showing 19 of the 30 delegates in Egypt's Hurghada city approving to move forward with a referendum on the 2017 draft constitution. The draft was formed by 60 Libyans equally representing the three regions of East, West and South. But in recent years, the committee has been severely criticized by the Eastern politicians. It is still not clear when the Libyan referendum will be held.
The interim government's main strategic mission is holding the general elections. Postponing the date is so far non-negotiable. That means technically everyone interested in Libya wants to reach the minimum agreement between Libyans to get that process going. That's why I think a referendum might not precede the elections. After the elected government is formed, it makes more sense for it to take on responsibilities of the new constitution, the new positions and all other challenges.
The constitutional track is part of the UN-led Libyan political talks. A third round of talks will be held in February to set the constitutional requirements needed for Libya to hold elections in December.
Libyans have been debating about their new constitution for nearly 6 years. The initial agreement reached in Hurghada promises to put a final end to this long legal dispute. It is also another indication that rival politicians are continuing to bridge the huge gap in the views between them. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Let's go to Somalia now, where years of conflict has orphaned thousands of children. In response, authorities have now revived a center that provides accommodation and education to children whose parents died while serving the nation. CGTN's Abdulaziz Bello reports from Mogadishu.
It's early morning and students queue up for inspection. Police General Ali Hirsi Barre is the administrator at this state-run learning center for orphans. The center is home to 120 children of police officers who died while in the line of duty. The majority lost their lives in security operations against Al-Shabaab, the Al-Qaeda-affiliated group. Barre says the process of verifying cases takes time before a child is brought to this center.
Before children are brought to this center, the police and military must confirm the cause of death and current financial position. If the police officer had many children, not all can be accommodated. A certain percentage will be enlisted here. Those at home will receive the salary of their deceased parents.
In general, children are considered orphans upon the death of their father and not the mother. This, in turn, means that children born by a father who is not a police officer cannot benefit from this state-run center, even if their mother served in the Somali police force. Decades of conflict and an ongoing armed insurgency have had a huge toll on the security sector. Hundreds of service members have lost their lives, leaving behind families and children with no one to provide for them. In memory of their parents, students dress in uniform with the police force logo. The center provides education to children based on the state learning curriculum. Students also take part in sporting activities like basketball, football and karate.
The center has a school with 13 teachers, with 3 of them teaching religion. They all work on voluntary basis. The students are trained on the same education system like other children in private and state-owned schools. Hospitals provide free healthcare to the children, both private and public ones. We have received plenty of support from well-wishers.
The center is funded by donations. Police officers contribute $1 each month. The government re-established the center 3 years ago. It was created in the early 1970s by the former military government under the late President Mohamed Siad Barre. Meanwhile, authorities hope to create a new batch of dedicated police officers once the children at this center graduate from universities. Abdul Aziz Bilo, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
Coming to Kenya now. Historically, due to its semi-arid conditions, snakes have thrived in Baringo County, deep in Kenya's Rift Valley region. The county government estimates that hundreds of people are bitten by snakes every month. Well, now local experts are teaching residents how to keep the snakes at bay and what to do if bitten. CGTN's Wilkista Nyabwa reports.
Residents of Kambi Samaki in Kenya's Rift Valley region start their days early. They are intent on completing their tasks before nightfall. When it gets dark, snakes crawl out from beneath the rocks where they hide until it is cool. In this village, everyone knows someone who has been bitten by a snake. Charles Kipyegon suffered a snake bite in 1996.
I was in my house, seated, and then I wanted to move a stone. I wanted my children. Then after doing this, moving that stone, and I was bitten, attacked by the snake.
Neighbors rushed him to hospital where doctors administered anti-venom treatment. He recovered, but still carries the scars.
My hand, sometimes when you want to touch, it is paralyzed.
The semi-arid environment of most parts of Baringo County makes this a favorable habitat for a number of snake species. The county government estimates that every month between 200 to 300 people suffer snake bites. A third die from the bites. Even when the victims survive, they are often disfigured.
The incidents of snake attacks mostly occur here during the night time. The snakes like to come into our houses.
At the local snake park, visitors can see indigenous snake species such as the rock python, the spitting cobra, puff adders and black mambas. The black mambas are among some of the most venomous snakes in the region. But the park does more than just satisfy visitors' curiosity. Officials often hold talks, advising community members on how to keep snakes away.
We advise people actually to clear the compound, to make sure that there's no hanging trees around, because particularly the tree climbers.
But residents have devised their own methods of coping. Charles believes the ants that mill around his home irritate the snakes.
Right now what we are telling our children is they have to, when they find rocks, possibly can be the home of, never put their fingers, never tamper. Some kind of flowers which produce a certain smell that snakes don't.
It isn't unusual to see water vessels such as this one on doorsteps in homesteads across Baringo County. A section of locals believe that this is one of the ways in which they can keep snakes out.
They have to ensure that also water throws are actually left outside the compound, so that if they come out at night to take water, they don't come into the room.
Some methods, like the ants and water troughs, are yet to be proven scientifically. Others, like clearing bushes, have proved effective in keeping snakes at bay. The government has also moved to stock local hospitals with anti-venom and to train health workers. And whenever they spot a snake, locals have learned to call the Kenya Wildlife Service to remove it. However, the rough terrain still poses a challenge to patients rushing to hospitals. Each precaution therefore counts as humans and snakes try to find room to coexist in this semi-arid land that is home to them both. Wilkisa Nyabwa, CGTN.
You're watching Africa Live. Your business news up next. Coming up, the African Development Bank to provide debt relief of more than $400 million to Sudan. And inflation in Zimbabwe drops to 349%, a lot better than the over 700% from some months earlier.
We journey across the dunes and the sweltering sands of the Sahara to bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope from one of the harshest environments on the planet.
هذا العام كيف نقولوا عام الأول أرض جفاف.
Join us as we explore how climate change is affecting Africa's largest desert.
It's just taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Over the last 14 hours of rain.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines.
You've got to get out, go there, and you'll find them. In the bazaars of Casablanca. Among the crowds in Cairo.
Who come to visit Cairo, the ancient capital of Egypt.
Along the waters of the Nile. Along the sands of the Sahara. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. No one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
We start your business news in the United States. Former President Donald Trump pulled the country out of a number of global deals while in office. He favored a unilateralist approach. His successor, Joe Biden, on the other hand, says America's standing on the world stage has diminished and vows to play a bigger role. CGTN's William Denslow looks at the task Biden faces.
On his first day in office, Joe Biden has pledged to rejoin the Paris Climate Accord and hold a climate summit within the first 100 days of his presidency. This marks a stark departure from his predecessor Donald Trump, who pulled the US out of the 2015 agreement on grounds that it put America at a disadvantage in global trade. President Trump's preference for unilateralism over multilateralism has played out frequently at the United Nations over the past several years. The Trump administration has pulled out of several UN agencies, including the World Health Organization and UNESCO. Joe Biden has vowed to rejoin the WHO and for the US to once again play a leading role in global diplomacy. As vice president in the Obama administration, the US negotiated the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the trade deal between the US and 11 other nations that would have covered roughly 40% of the global economy. But Congress didn't sign off on it, and President Trump pulled out of the agreement in 2017. Analysts believe a Biden administration might struggle getting lawmakers to agree rejoining the TPP. It remains unclear how the Biden administration's approach to trade will differ from that of his predecessor, but it's likely decisions will be made more in concert with US allies, a marked change from President Trump's tendency to go it alone. William Denslow, CGTN, New York.
Sudan and the African Development Bank have agreed on a strategy to provide relief on more than $400 million in arrears owed by Sudan. The Sudanese Finance Ministry said the bank was financing development projects in the country worth more than $500 million. Sudan was released from US sanctions last year, allowing it back into the world's financial markets. The country is reportedly looking at the United Kingdom, France and the US for debt restructuring. Meanwhile, easing inflation in Zimbabwe is restoring consumer confidence and giving a boost to economic recovery measures. According to official figures, December inflation was 349%, capping months of steady decline from a high of 785% in May. From Harare, here's Farai Makutuya with the details.
Efforts by the Treasury to rein in inflation that had spiraled to a 10-year peak paid off in the latter part of 2020 as the rate of price increases retreated in successive months. Though it did not reach the targeted 300% by year end, it was still a boon for hard-hit shoppers.
That decline in inflation also tends to affect disposable incomes. So what they could buy in the beginning of 2020, in the second quarter and in the third quarter, obviously there is a huge difference because prices would have more or less stayed at the same level.
The gains were achieved by containing money supply growth.
The major driver of inflation in Zimbabwe in the past 3 years has largely been unabated money supply, which was beyond economic growth. Last year alone, money supply grew by over 103%, so that does push inflation. So now, most producers and retailers have been allowed to transact in foreign currency. So what it does is that it reduces demand for foreign currency on the parallel market, which was actually very key in pushing prices up.
However, the restoration of multi-currency regime had some unintended consequences, such as multi-tiered pricing. Shoppers here say because of the market distortions, the value of the local unit continues to be eroded, and that has diminished their buying power.
There has been an improvement for those who earn US dollars. But if you get paid in local currency, it's still difficult to make ends meet.
We hear that the local currency has gained against the US dollar, but it's all in theory. The reality is when you try and go and shop, you don't buy much because things are still going up.
Authorities will argue that the numbers show the increases are at a much slower pace than before, a trend they hope to maintain in 2021, where average annual inflation is projected at below 135%. Farai Makutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
And moving to Nigeria now, where restaurants are struggling as inflation compounds the pandemic impact. Melanie Igbe's restaurant hosted about 50 people a day when it opened in Lagos a year ago. While fear of the coronavirus has driven most diners away, Igbe believes inflation has only made the situation worse.
Since Café de Lyon opened in January 2020, the price of basic ingredients has risen sharply. Just weeks before Nigeria's first-known coronavirus case was diagnosed in Lagos. Food inflation has risen for 16 straight months, and as of December 2020, it stood at 19.56%.
This has really crippled us in the last 1 year, and then the prices of food have just skyrocketed. The quality of food that would normally plate for our customers, we've had to reduce this.
White onions, an ingredient used in many of Melanie's dishes, costs around $2.62 each, a $2 hike more than she would pay when she opened her eatery. Melanie has resisted increasing the price of dishes to retain customers.
Customers don't come out anymore. We will not be in business anymore. There will be no reason for the restaurant to be opened. And obviously, we're looking at a timeline of around May, June, or during the summer at the most. That's it, we would have to shut down.
In addition, the ordered border closures that began in August 2019 to combat smuggling that continued until December 2020 to prevent the spread of the coronavirus further punctured the sector's stakeholders.
Most of our produce are not really made locally, and then the ones that are made locally, which is at the middle belt, there were lots of killings and fightings there, so price really spiked.
Nigeria is in its second recession in 4 years, triggered by an oil price crash that hammered state revenues and weakened the naira. This has made imports more expensive, spurring on inflation. And with the global impact of the pandemic added on, many restaurants may soon be on the chopping block. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
Now, in South Africa, the liquor industry is hoping to get another tax deferment from government. Industry bodies have submitted an application arguing that they've suffered massive revenue shortfalls and job losses. The request comes after President Cyril Ramaphosa banned all alcohol trade for a third time. Meanwhile, brewing giant SAB is challenging the ban in a submission to the country's constitutional court. Sumitra Naidu tells us more.
It's estimated the South African Revenue Service will have lost a third of its estimated tax collections by the 2020 financial year end next month. Last year, government granted the liquor industry tax deferments worth $33 million because of the ban. The liquor industry needs more relief.
Our biggest tax bill every month and every year is specifically with regards to excise tax. Excise tax in South Africa it's charged on the production of the goods, not on the sale of the goods.
It's going to be difficult for them to pay the duty because the money that they get from the sales is the one that they're going to use to pay, and especially because duty is paid at source, so they pay the duty before they sell the goods. So when the alcohol products, gets out of their warehouse, they must pay the duty already.
The liquor industry pays around $150 million in taxes each month. Because alcohol producers pay tax at source, they already owe the Revenue Service large amounts on excise duties despite the halt in trade.
So the reality is we are currently owe the South African Revenue Service excise tax for goods that were produced in December and November, which we haven't been able to sell because of the ban on the sale of alcohol. So we have approached SARS and Treasury to ask for a delay in the payment of those excise taxes. And we think it's only fair that we pay those excise taxes when we're allowed to sell the products that we've actually manufactured.
Whichever way you get taxed in South Africa, whether it's duty at source or at the point of sale, the tax gets funded out of cash flow. And right now there's no cash flow. And we've asked government to defer our payment. It's important to note it's a deferment. We're not asking that we not pay our tax, but that we pay it 90 days later.
SARS revenues are expected to be $20 billion less this year because of the impacts of COVID-19. Tax collections were already taking strain due to weak economic growth. The fiscus is under more pressure than ever before, especially with the Treasury trying to find money for vaccines.
Despite the heavy losses for both government and industry, it was decided that a third liquor ban was necessary in order to help alleviate the pressure on the healthcare system. There's still no confirmation as to when the ban will be lifted. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Well, that's where we leave your business news. Here's what's still ahead on the program. Coming up, some of South Africa's world-famous game reserves are struggling as the pandemic keeps visitors away.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Panater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference. Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
We start in Ethiopia, where tens of thousands of people have been attending the annual Epiphany Festival. The Ethiopian Epiphany is known as Timket, and it symbolizes togetherness, the cleaning of one's sins through mass baptism, and the time for extraordinary religious festivities. In 2019, UNESCO added the Ethiopian Epiphany to its to its list of its intangible cultural heritage of humanity. The three-day event was held despite COVID-19 restrictions in the country.
Epiphany is being celebrated especially this year. This is due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. When we celebrate this holiday, our hearts also go out to those who lost their lives due to this disease. So we are here trying to be cautious, but at the same time celebrate this blessed day. We need God for us to defeat this disease.
This year's holiday is celebrated with a lot of color and pomp. We have the youth who have joined hands here with the authorities to make sure it's peacefully celebrated, and so far we are delighted to see the togetherness and the unity as well as love from our people. I'd like to wish all Orthodox Christians a happy Epiphany.
Into South Africa now, where game reserves continue to face hard times. The COVID-19 pandemic has dried up the once steady flow of international and local visitors that drove many businesses. With no immediate relief in sight, many are now struggling to keep their gates open. CGTN's Travis Andrews has more with this report.
South Africa's Big Five is a top international tourism drawcard, and some visitors are willing to spend big to see them. They usually head to luxury private game reserves such as Shamuwari, where private tailor-made tours can go for thousands of dollars a day. That was, though, until COVID-19 hit the country. The reserve's international business has grinded to a halt, and they've had to cut more than half of their staff.
Unfortunately, because the second wave has not just hit South Africa, but has also hit a lot of our key international markets, we started seeing some bookings coming through for the first quarter of this year from the international markets, the US and the UK, only to have all of that business cancel in the first 2 weeks of January and late December. Obviously, because the second wave has also hit those countries.
Now the reserve is relying solely on the domestic market to survive. They have altered their rates to make it more affordable to more South Africans. Like many other game reserves, they also had to rein in their costs and re-examine their business model to focus on the long run.
We've had to be innovative. We've had to reinvent the way we operate. We've had to find efficiencies, and that'll all hold us in good stead in the long run. It'll help us survive until that international business comes back. But I think gone are the days where business model will rest solely on capturing the international market. I think if they're businesses, and if we're one of them, then I think we've learned, we've counted the cost of that arrogance, and we won't repeat that mistake.
With so many staff reductions and reduced salaries, the broad economic fallout of the pandemic goes far beyond the fences of game reserves.
Biggest impact, in our view, is going to be, it has been a reduction in the payroll, and therefore it has been a reduction in communities of people who are highly dependent upon the income that these private game reserves generate. If you can imagine, the private game reserves are located remotely. They're in areas where there's very little other economy other than the tourism income.
There is some optimism, though, that global efforts to roll out COVID-19 vaccines will soon start to stimulate the tourism industry. The sector in South Africa is expected to mark a recovery in the third quarter of this year. Wide natural and open environments at game reserves offer lends itself to a new normal, where social distancing has become a reality. Private game lodges believe they have that in abundance, as well as a proven tourism product that will eventually recover in the long run. Travis Andrews, CGTN, Cape Town.
Meanwhile, in Nigeria, wildlife experts are pushing the government to teach citizens how to protect wild animals. The move will help the country do more in combating wildlife trafficking. The Environmental Investigation Agency says over the past 5 years, more than 30 tons of ivory and 167 tons of pangolin scales have been smuggled through Nigeria. But authorities have intensified efforts to reduce poaching activities. Here's CGTN's Phil Ihaza with more.
Romeo is 22 years old. The buffalo is resident at this National Children's Park and Zoo in Abuja. The zookeeper Yakubu Suleiman says Romeo was brought here at a very young age after being rescued from hunters in the bush.
The buffalo Romeo is now one of the few species left in Nigeria, but thank God we retrieved it, because by now it would have been devoured either by hunters for meat, medicine, or sale of its body part.
Not many wild animals like Romeo are luckier enough to survive in the forest. Statistics from the Environmental Investigation Agency show that about 4,000 elephants were killed in the past 5 years in Nigeria. Experts say poaching in Nigeria is not as severe as other parts of Africa because it is mostly done by farmers who hunt these animals mainly for food and medicine.
In Nigeria, most people involved, they are just subsistence, farmers, not really a big business per se, because most the meat go for as bushmeat. And these people, they are very poor. If somebody can kill an elephant and sell the tusk like 10, 20 or 30,000, you see, it's quite a big money. So that is why it's rising every day, because the level of poverty is high.
But the government has been busy tracking down illegal smugglers of these animals.
Last year, the government also partnered with the United Nations, other countries and relevant agencies in Nigeria to strengthen the country's response to trafficking of wildlife.
Experts say teaching more people like hunters about the dangers of killing wildlife will help minimize the problem of poaching.
As a farmers, if they are farmers, find a way of improving their own, agricultural practice so that they can go into full farming activity and forget about hunting and what have you. And as well, the education can also come, try to tell them how useful these animals are to us as human beings and to the ecosystem.
Such efforts could shield the likes of Romeo from the threat of extinction and ensure they live safely in the wild. Phil Ihaza, CGTN, Abuja.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
Your sports news now, and we start in Cameroon with the ongoing